I had believed that my work as a xenobiologist for the Galactic Union had already exposed me to the strangest forms of life the universe could produce. I had cataloged amphibian cyclopes on the stormy world of Relia, encountered luminous, plant-like beings on the gas giant Bornak, and even studied the fractal, crystal entities of the Ovum Nebula. Each of these species had taught me something new about the miraculous variety that sentient life could take. And yet, none had prepared me for the shocking revelation on Charayon 7, a planet that was supposed to be just another routine survey. I am Dr. Swll Narek, and this is the story of how we discovered that humans, these newly encountered bipeds, do not, in fact, possess a neural switch to stop fighting when any sensible creature would collapse. When I first stepped onto the surface of Charayon 7, it felt like a standard assignment. Commander Mavarol led our small survey team. She was a respected leader in the Union, known for her level-headed judgments and unwavering loyalty to Council directives. Our objective was simple: document local fauna, measure atmospheric quality, and confirm whether or not any intelligent species occupied the planet. Our vessel, the Ascendant Light, orbited overhead while we deployed in a small shuttle to the southwestern plateau. Charayon 7's atmosphere was crisp but breathable, with mild variations of oxygen and nitrogen, enough for us to venture outside with minimal gear. The place was scenic in its own stark way, dusty plains stretching into the distance, broken occasionally by jagged rock formations and clusters of pale, scrub-like vegetation. We touched down at midday by local time. Our group consisted of myself, Commander Roll, and Officer Darius, an adept linguist and field translator who had encountered more foreign tongues than any other officer I knew. We expected to conduct a standard foot survey, scanning for signs of advanced life. Within minutes of stepping off our shuttle, we detected unusual radiation bursts in the low range, like a network of short-range transmissions. Our scanners indicated a small outpost approximately 1 kilometer from our landing point. Curious, we moved in that direction. As we closed in, I felt a sensation of unease. The readings from that outpost suggested a technology level that wasn't typical for Charayon 7. Commander Roll signaled us to advance quietly, so we deactivated our standard ID beacons. We circled a tall rock formation, stepping carefully between boulders and dried shrubs, until we saw it, a group of what appeared to be artificial shelters made of some synthetic material. Outside, to our surprise, stood a set of upright, bipedal figures, all wearing matching outfits of some kind. They had angled devices in their arms, some form of projectile weapon, perhaps, and they moved with a certain purposeful tension, scanning the horizon. I remember the flicker of shock on Commander Roll's face. According to Union records, Charayon 7 had never harbored an advanced civilization of its own. The presence of off-worlders suggested another race had arrived before or around the same time as we did. I checked the known species in our database, flipping through the hollow projections. Nothing matched these bipeds precisely. They were fairly tall, with 2 forward-facing eyes, hair on top of their heads, and proportionally slimmer bodies than many other sentient races we had encountered. They wore forms of camouflage cloth, possibly for blending with the rocky environment. I wanted to hail them, simply approach, greet, and see if we could open communication. That would be the standard procedure for unregistered contact. But Commander Roll, concerned for the safety of the team, instructed us to remain hidden until we could glean more information. Officer Darius fiddled with a scanning device that could detect neural inhibitors, biological pathways that, in over 99% of advanced species, automatically shut the body down when subjected to extreme duress. We had used these scans hundreds of times to ensure that if we ever had to subdue or incapacitate potential threats, we did so without harming them. The readouts, however, came back inconclusive. He frowned, trying to recalibrate, but had difficulty locking onto the signals. The bipedal group, about 10 of them, looked on edge. One was clearly guarding a position by a metallic crate. Another patrolled the perimeter with that weapon held at the ready. Commander Roll decided we needed a small demonstration. Union protocol in these scenarios often allowed for the use of a mild neurotoxin, an aerosol tranquilizer that should safely incapacitate unknown sentients so we could ascertain if they posed a danger. It was designed to be harmless, wearing off in less than an hour, used primarily for capture or peaceful resolution. We deployed a hover drone, camouflaged to blend with the environment, and set it to release a colorless, odorless gas around the perimeter of the site. We watched from our vantage point behind the rocks, waiting to see if they would slowly slump over. I recall my heart beating quickly, even though this procedure was supposedly routine. The bipeds began to cough or blink, some staggering, as if dizzy. Several fell to their knees, dropping their weapons. A calm fell upon the outpost. Commander Roll nodded, satisfied that the gas had done its job with minimal harm. She signaled for us to approach carefully. We stepped out, still keeping distance, scanning the limp forms for signs of life. It all seemed textbook: mild sedation, stable vitals. My mind was already racing with excitement about examining these creatures up close, learning their language, verifying their biology. Then one of them stood back up. I froze. This was not supposed to happen. The tranquilizer was potent enough to sedate a large, robust species. And yet, here this figure was, one with short-cropped hair and a small patch of red fabric wrapped around an arm, shaking off the effects and reclaiming that weapon. Another figure also pushed up from the ground, breathing heavily. They looked dazed but still functional. I heard Commander Roll hiss a caution. Officer Darius stumbled backward, checking the readout on his device. Confusion washed over me. A normal sentient, upon absorbing that dose, should have been out cold. They saw us. The one with the red cloth around the arm shouted something in a gruff voice I couldn't understand. Another raised a mechanical device and fired. The projectile whizzed past us, sending a burst of rock fragments into the air. I dropped to the ground, heart hammering. Commander Roll shouted for us to fall back. We retreated behind the large rock formation, reactivating our personal shields. The next hail of projectiles pinged against the stone. I smelled ozone from the micro-shields deflecting lethal hits. Up the dosage. Commander Roll called to me, eyes wide. She had seldom looked so disturbed. I took control of the hover drone's injection system and cranked the aerosol dosage to the maximum safe limit. The gas whooshed out again around the campsite. A swirl of dust and chemical haze drifted over them. I dared to peek around the boulder, expecting to see them collapse. Instead, they staggered and coughed, knees buckling. This time, one or two more dropped face first into the dirt. But yet again, several of them struggled back to their feet, as though driven by pure will. One of them kept firing the projectile weapon, although the aim wavered. Another was crawling toward some crate, leaving a smear of blood behind. They were not giving up. My mind could not comprehend it. "We have to pull back," Officer Darius shouted. "Whatever they are, the standard sedatives won't keep them down." Commander Roll made the call, and we dashed to the shuttle, taking advantage of the short window where some had collapsed. She gave an order for the drone to deploy a containment net across part of the campsite, and, in the confusion, we managed to subdue a single figure who had been fully sedated. We dragged the limp body aboard. Projectile fire pinged off the shuttle's hull. One or two bipeds, still not unconscious, tried in vain to bring us down as the shuttle ascended into the thin clouds. My last glimpse of that outpost was the sight of those creatures, still on their feet, some clearly injured, but refusing to surrender to the toxin. Back on the Ascendant Light, we sealed our newly acquired specimen inside a stasis chamber in the medical bay. I recall the tension in the ship's corridors. Commander Roll convened an emergency briefing. She had a grim expression as she addressed me, Officer Darius, and half a dozen senior crew. "In all my years," she said, "I've never seen any sentient that could withstand a level 9 neural inhibitor. We almost didn't make it back." She looked to me. "Doctor, we need answers. How can they remain active under such conditions?" I nodded, though my mind churned with more questions than answers. "I'll conduct a full analysis. We'll take samples of blood, neural tissue, see if there's a hidden metabolic factor," Darius added. "I tried scanning them from the field, but the device gave inconsistent readings. Perhaps this species has an unusual nervous system. Commander Roll rubbed her forehead. We need to exercise extreme caution. We'll keep the specimen in maximum sedation and restraints. Do what you must to figure out what we're dealing with. That night, if one could even call it night in orbit, I began my research. The specimen was a biped with short black hair. It wore some sort of uniform with patches that read, SGT. Elena McBride. Beneath that was an emblem, an angular shape with stripes, no doubt signifying an organization or faction. With the help of the ship's universal translator, we tried to interpret any labels or insignia, but the best we could do was guess this was a soldier from a group calling itself something like Earth Force or United Earth. That name, Earth, was unfamiliar to us. The Union's archives lacked direct references to such a place. A few hours into the biological analysis, my scanners confirmed the shocking truth. SGT, McBride species lacked a typical neural inhibitor pathway. They possessed no inherent biological mechanism that shut down motor function under intense pain or sedation. Instead, their physiology showed a remarkable capacity to funnel high-stress signals into additional adrenal output, increasing their capacity to fight. Where most species have an automatic override that forces them to lose consciousness before sustaining lethal damage, these humans, my scan used the term H. Sapiens, gleaned from a partial data trace in the soldier's personal device, simply did not have that system. I watched in astonishment as the sedation levels that would have put a Terrian mammoth out for days produced only moderate brain wave suppression in the human. I recorded my findings meticulously, adding commentary about the evolutionary implications. Could it be that on this planet called Earth, the environment was so dangerous that shutting down under duress was detrimental to survival? That would be unprecedented across the advanced species in the Union, which typically evolved some safety mechanism to prevent self-destruction. My curiosity warred with my sense of alarm. A species that can continue fighting long after any rational being would fall was a terrifying prospect. My research was interrupted when the comm lines crackled to life, indicating a hail from Commander Roll. She sounded out of breath. DR. Narek, we have a situation in the medical bay. The specimen, she's conscious. I dropped my datapad in shock. I had left the sedation at the highest recommended setting. It should have kept her under for hours more. Racing into the corridor, I found crew members in a near panic, retreating from the medical chamber. The stasis field flickered. Inside, I saw SGT. McBride hunched forward, forcibly pulling at her restraints. Veins stood out along her arms and neck. She glanced up, and our eyes locked through the plexiglass barrier. For an instant, my breath caught in my throat because it almost felt as if she was challenging me, asking me wordlessly why I thought she would stay down. Commander Roll stood behind a protective field, barking orders to the security team. Increase the stasis intensity. They tried, but the soldier kept pulling. Sparks flew from the restraint clasps. At last, a surge of purple electricity rippled across the field, and she slumped for the moment, her body momentarily stunned. The security staff quickly added an extra layer of physical straps. I stood there, mind reeling, as I updated my notes. High-level sedation plus a stasis field, yet the subject can still regain consciousness briefly. No off-switch indeed. We decided to keep her in medically induced coma for the time being. If we attempted to interrogate or communicate directly, she might break free. In the following day, our ship ran scenario drills. Commander Roll was concerned that more of these humans might be on Charion 7 or en route. Officer Darius, analyzing the soldier's personal device, discovered partial star charts referencing a cluster of systems near the galactic rim. There's also a hint that others from Earth might be stationed on Charion 7 for some unknown mission, perhaps resource gathering or perhaps something more covert. Sure enough, a long-range scan soon confirmed the presence of a craft approaching from the planet's surface. We recognized the power signature as different from our own. It had a metallic hull with an engine arrangement designed for chemical thrust supplemented by advanced energy converters, a design that was oddly primitive and yet surprisingly adaptable. The commander quickly readied our defensive systems. The Ascendant Light powered up its stealth field in an attempt to remain hidden, but that did not last. The incoming craft performed a scanning sweep that somehow located our position in orbit. We detected a directed communication beam to unidentified vessel above Charayon 7. This is Lieutenant Sarah Kim of the United Earth Defense Corps. We have reason to believe you hold one of our soldiers. We request an immediate discussion regarding her return and your presence in restricted space. Please respond. I felt my breath catch once more. So they definitely were here in a military capacity. I looked at Commander Roll. She had her lips pressed tightly together. They're calling us out. We can't just ignore them, she muttered. I agreed. Officer Darius suggested we open a secure channel but maintain full shields. After all, if one soldier on board was proving this difficult to subdue, how many more might be on that craft? Commander Roll nodded and signaled me to stand by as the comm was opened. This is Commander Mava Roll of the Galactic Union research vessel Ascendant Light. She said, voice calm but firm. We came to Charayon 7 on a peaceful survey. Your people attacked us on the surface. Commander Roll, the voice of Lieutenant Kim returned. We have records indicating you released some sort of toxin on our troops without provocation. That is hardly what we call peaceful. I winced, aware that from their perspective, it really did look like an unprovoked attack. Commander Roll tried to offer the standard Union explanation, that we used non-lethal tranquilizers to ensure safety for first contact scenarios. Lieutenant Kim was not impressed. Then another voice came through, lower in pitch, carrying an authoritative resonance. This is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale, also of United Earth. We appreciate that you did not kill our people. However, we have confirmed that you have one of our own aboard your vessel. We expect her safe return. Commander Roll shared a glance with me and signaled to mute the line. If we release her, who's to say they won't open fire on us? We still don't fully understand their capabilities, except that they're terrifyingly resilient. She paused, but refusing could push us all into a war. Darius suggested a middle path. Let's propose a truce and a proper meeting. Maybe we can turn the soldier back to them under control conditions. This planet belongs to neither side. We can meet on neutral ground. Unmuting, we offered a tentative arrangement for negotiation. Colonel Hale was cautious but accepted the idea, insisting we choose a side away from both our vessels and that each side bring only a small delegation. Secretly, Commander Roll and I worried about a trap, but we had no better options. Meanwhile, security staff tried again to keep SGT McBride in sedation. The question remained, was she the only super soldier among them, or was every single human this dangerous? We flew a small shuttle down to Charayon 7's surface the next day. The sky was tinted pale orange by dust in the atmosphere, and there were swirling breezes that kicked up sand. Our chosen meeting place was a flat expanse near some low, jagged cliffs. The humans arrived in a compact craft that looked as if it combined both aerodynamic design and a certain ruggedness. The hatch opened, and out stepped Colonel Marcus Hale, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an all-black uniform with an insignia that matched the one we had seen on SGT McBride's clothes. Beside him was Lieutenant Sarah Kim, shorter, with an intelligent gaze, and a few other soldiers who formed a protective ring, scanning the surroundings with discipline. Commander Roll and I exited our shuttle, accompanied by Officer Darius and 2 Union security troopers. We had SGT McBride on a hover stretcher, in a deep sedation but stable, physically unharmed. When Colonel Hale and his people saw her, they visibly tensed, weapons half-raised, uncertain if we had done anything nefarious. We kept our palms visible, universal sign of no ill intent, and Darius quickly explained that she had not been harmed beyond the sedation necessary to keep her from hurting herself or us. Colonel Hale's expression was stony. We'll want to verify her condition ourselves, he said. Commander Roll permitted a scan. Their medical device beeped across McBride's vitals, confirming no permanent damage. They exchanged glances, then gently took hold of the stretcher, pulling her inside a portable medical field. Lieutenant Kim glared at us. "We lost good people back there," she said softly. "That tranquilizer messed them up. A few were hospitalized for respiratory complications." Commander Roll nodded, a flash of guilt on her features. "We did not intend lethal harm, but we needed to ensure our team's safety. Your people were armed and threatened us with projectile weapons." Colonel Hale gave a short nod. "I see. We can't deny that we were prepared for hostilities if we encountered an unknown faction. Earth has had too many conflicts over the centuries to assume the best of strangers." He exhaled. "Look, Commander, Earth doesn't want an interstellar war, but we do want to protect our own." I seized the moment. "I'm Dr. Eswalel Narek, xenobiologist," I said, stepping forward. "I've been studying your biology. Our findings are extraordinary. We've never encountered a species that can withstand that level of sedation. Would you be willing to share how or why that is?" My voice held genuine wonder, and I suspect Colonel Hale heard it. He gave me a measured look. "Doctor, we didn't evolve an off switch, if that's what you're asking. On Earth, historically, we had predators, harsh climates, constant conflicts among ourselves. Maybe at some point, there was a survival advantage to fighting until we dropped dead. Or maybe it's just an accident of evolution. Either way, we learned to manage it through training, discipline, and moral codes." Lieutenant Kim's eyes flickered with resentment. "But we also can't just let others push us around. We stand up for ourselves. No shutting down. No giving up." She left unspoken the threat implied. They would defend themselves against the entire Galactic Union if forced to. The conversation that followed was tense, but surprisingly civil. Commander Roll offered to bring them to the Ascendant Light for more thorough diplomatic talks, but Colonel Hale declined. "We'd rather not walk into your warship unarmed," he said, "the same way you'd probably not want to step into ours." We reached a compromise. We would exchange a small group of representatives. I felt both fear and excitement at the idea of having multiple humans aboard, but also recognized the potential for bridging our misunderstandings. Colonel Hale, for his part, didn't hide his apprehension about letting Union delegates see more of Earth's advanced outpost on Charayan 7. Then, quite abruptly, everything changed when our mutual scanners blared with an emergency alert. A foreign fleet had appeared in the sector, unidentified, heavily armed, and ignoring all standard Hale protocols. It became obvious within minutes that these new arrivals intended to attack. They were broadcasting on multiple channels in a guttural language that, after a quick run through Darius's universal translator, we recognized as the Hreskin, a notorious group of raiders that terrorized unprotected colonies on the fringe worlds. If the Hreskin had discovered that not one, but two new targets existed in their path, they might decide to plunder both with savage glee. Commander Roll stiffened. "We have only moderate defenses on the Ascendant Light. If they have a full raiding fleet, we're outmatched. Colonel Ailes Faz Dakunet. Our own ship wasn't meant for large-scale battles either. This is just a scouting detachment." A hush fell over us. The Hreskin had a reputation for enslaving survivors of their conquests. This was a do-or-die scenario if they truly engaged. At last, Colonel Hale exhaled. "Then perhaps we have a reason to cooperate, Commander. Let's get back into orbit, regroup, and see if we can face them together." What followed was the strangest alliance I have ever witnessed. Commander Roll and Colonel Hale formed a combined tactical plan. The Ascendant Light would bolster the region with its advanced shielding technology, while the human vessel used its heavier projectile arsenal to strike vulnerable points on the Hreskin ships. They coordinated a plan to lure the pirates away from Charayan 7's orbit so we could engage them on more favorable terms. I remember feeling an odd surge of relief that we had humans on our side. Despite everything, it was better than facing them as enemies. We scrambled back to our respective ships. In the Ascendant Light's command deck, I could see the Hreskin formation, a cluster of sleek, predatory ships, bristling with spike-like appendages. Our sensors indicated they carried a lethal combination of energy cannons and boarding craft. Commander Roll's face was pale as she quickly arranged our meager squadron of security drones into a defensive line. On the main screen, I saw the Earth vessel, which Colonel Hale had called the Dauntless, circle around to flank the Hreskin. Over the comm, Hale's voice crackled. On my mark, we'll feign a retreat. Draw them in so they spread out. Then we hit them from behind. Understood. Affirmative, Commander Roll responded, her voice tense. The plan seemed risky, but time was not on our side. The Hreskin opened fire, and the Ascendant Light's hull reverberated. Sparks flew across the control panel. We fought back, returning fire from our forward cannons, while the Dauntless pummeled the Raiders' flanks. I have never seen anything like the humans' approach to combat. They used half a dozen cunning maneuvers, including something they called suppression runs, forcing the Hreskin to reposition. Meanwhile, Colonel Hale orchestrated a multi-vector assault that capitalized on the pirates' confusion. In the midst of this, a shrill alarm blared from the lower decks. I heard frantic shouts through my earpiece. The Hreskin had launched boarding torpedoes, and at least 3 squads were forcing their way into our corridors. Commander Roll swore under a breath. We're losing ground down there. Dr. Narek joined the security detail to coordinate from the med bay if needed. I hurried out, hearing the echo of blasts in the distance. Union security troopers were setting up barricades in the corridors. But the pirates, hulking reptilian creatures with sharp claws and beady red eyes, charged in. They slashed at the defenders, ignoring flesh wounds as they advanced. Our troopers returned fire, and several pirates went down. It was mayhem. Then, over the intercom, came an even more unexpected announcement. Multiple human soldiers now in the docking bay, requesting permission to assist in repelling boarders. Apparently, the Dauntless had sent a small rescue team onto the Ascendant Light, bridging across via a breach in the hull. I stood near a sealed door, adrenaline coursing through me, when it hissed open. 6 humans entered, each in a different form of protective gear. One of them was none other than SGT. Elena McBride, who I thought was still half sedated in their med bay. She looked battered but had a determined gleam in her eyes. She carried a firearm and was limping, but she nodded at me as if to say she recognized who I was, the unarmed xenobiologist. Then she and the others rushed past, heading straight into the fight with the Hreskin. I could hardly believe it. I was sure we had tranquilized her again before releasing her to Colonel Hale. Yet here she was, upright, pushing through the corridors to face an armed raiding party. I watched in stunned silence as McBride and her team advanced. One of the pirates roared, brandishing a plasma scythe. A human soldier was struck, stumbling as the scythe seared across their armor, leaving a gash in the plating and, presumably, in the flesh beneath. Yet the soldier did not fall. He just growled, shot the pirate at point-blank range, and collapsed only after the threat was neutralized. Another pirate, trying to flank them, found McBride's sidearm pointed directly at its head. She fired, and the raider dropped. In under a minute, the hallway was littered with Hreskin bodies, some dead, some incapacitated. The humans kept advancing. Officer Darius appeared behind me, panting. "They're unstoppable," he whispered. "Even the Hreskin have that adrenaline shock that shuts them down if they're severely wounded. But these humans, they fight until they can't physically move." The corridor was smoky from blasts, the overhead lights flickering, and I saw McBride urging another soldier to keep going, despite the bleeding wound in his shoulder. They pressed onward, clearing the section deck by deck. Union troopers were left gaping, because the humans neither hesitated nor retreated. For the first time, I felt an odd mixture of relief and dread. The unstoppable ferocity that had nearly overwhelmed US was, at this moment, our salvation. The combined efforts of the Ascendant Light's defenders and the Dauntless team eventually forced the Hreskin to retreat. Their boarding squads were either destroyed or withdrew to their launch points. In orbit, Colonel Hale maneuvered the Dauntless to deliver a final barrage that crippled the main Hreskin flagship. The pirates, seeing no easy plunder, turned tail, jumping to faster than light in scattered directions. The battered Ascendant Light remained, hull scorched, many systems barely functioning, but we had survived. Without the humans, we likely would have been overrun. When the dust settled, we reconvened in the main hold. I saw humans helping to carry wounded Union troopers, applying first aid with surprising gentleness. One soldier, a woman who had a large slash across her side, guided a limping, bird-like Relian officer to a makeshift triage area, calling out for medical supplies in a calm, controlled tone. My mind reeled with the duality. A species that could break free of sedation and keep fighting through mortal wounds, but also stoop to help a stranger in need, even if that stranger was from a race they had only just met. Commander Roll, her uniform torn and dusty, approached Colonel Hale, who was conferring with some of his own people. They exchanged a firm handshake, a gesture apparently signifying respect among humans. That small moment of camaraderie felt surreal. Colonel Hale, removing a battered helmet, turned to address me and the rest of the Union delegation that had gathered. "We didn't come here to pick a fight," he said quietly. "Earth has had enough wars of its own. We came to Charion 7 for resources and to ensure no one else threatened our outpost. But we certainly didn't expect to find the Galactic Union." Commander Roll nodded. "And we never expected to find humans. We have 1,000 questions, especially regarding your remarkable resilience. But it's clear that in a universe with threats like the Hreskin, we may be better off as allies than adversaries." I watched as SGT. McBride limped into view, battered, her face smeared with her own dried blood, but her eyes still alert. She gave me a nod. I felt compelled to address her directly. "Sergeant McBride, are you? Don't you need medical attention?" She wiped sweat from her brow, wincing. "We always need medical attention," she said, with a faint, sardonic grin. "But if I let every injury knock me down for good, I wouldn't have gotten past my first tour. Pain is just a reminder that I'm still alive." After the Hreskin crisis, we all found ourselves forced to remain near Charion 7 while we carried out emergency repairs. The Ascendant Light's engines were severely damaged. The Dauntless also had taken hits, though less severely. This forced the new reality of cooperation. Human engineers assisting Union specialists, sharing basic resources. We discovered that, despite their brutal capacity for fighting, humans possessed extraordinary aptitude for problem-solving under stress. They offered quick, unorthodox fixes for containment leaks and power rerouting that many Union engineers found unthinkable but ingenious. During these cooperative efforts, I spent time speaking at length with Colonel Hale and Lieutenant Kim about their homeworld. They described Earth's long history of conflict, centuries of war over territory, ideology, resources, culminating in global crises. Yet each time, humankind had clawed its way forward with new inventions, new treaties, new moral frameworks. "We had to develop these ethics," Lieutenant Kim remarked one evening in the Ascendant Lights lounge, "because without them, our capacity for violence would have wiped us out. We have no built-in safety valve, so we made our own." I asked her about the phrase, "no off switch," which had come up more than once in my research notes. She smiled wryly. "If you mean the biological limiters that keep other species from literally fighting themselves to death, yeah, we don't have that. Instead, we have doctors, philosophers, laws, and an entire culture that tries, mind you, to teach us not to push ourselves beyond reason. But in a crisis, especially a life-or-death fight, we could go further than most." Her honesty humbled me. For so long, the Union had assumed that this was a universal constant among all advanced species, that eventually your body's built-in neural inhibitors would put you out of the fight. The humans had no such stopgap. They had to consciously choose to stop. That was the key difference. And if they chose otherwise, if they decided to keep fighting despite injuries, sedation, or anything else, they would keep going until the fight was won or their bodies physically disintegrated. Commander Roll wrote an extensive report to the Council, summarizing our ordeal with the humans and the Hreskin. The final portion of her communique read, "We have encountered a species that appears to lack the biological restraint that has long been assumed a prerequisite for interstellar civilization. Their capacity for violence is alarming. Yet in them, we have also witnessed compassion, ingenuity, and a moral sense that restrains their destructiveness. This capacity for self-imposed discipline could make them either the most dangerous threat or the most valuable ally we have ever known. Meanwhile, Colonel Hale drafted a message to his superiors back on Earth, presumably relayed through some form of quantum transmitter we had never seen before. He requested additional diplomatic contingents, perhaps the beginnings of a more formal relationship with the Union. I found it surreal to watch these humans, who days ago had been shooting at us, now working alongside Union specialists, patching hull breaches, exchanging technology tips, sampling each other's ration packs. Some Union crew found the humans unsettling, especially after seeing them in combat, but many softened when they realized humans also had families, hobbies, humor, and cultural richness beyond the battlefield. One evening, as the ships orbited the planet in a silent cosmic dance, I joined a small gathering in the Ascendant Lights mess hall. There, SGT. McBride was propped up on a stool, sporting a thick bandage around her left shoulder. A few Union officers sat around, curious, while she told an anecdote about Earth's training regiments. She explained how new recruits endured something called boot camp, pushing through exhaustion, learning to fight as a unit. One officer, a reptilian Zorit named Nelkith, asked how she endured the pain. She shrugged, wincing slightly. "We build up tolerance," she answered, "or we break. Most of us push through because we have a reason to keep going. Sometimes that reason is just not letting your squad down." It was a stark reminder that they had replaced the biological off switch with something else, an internal psychological impetus. Whether that impetus was loyalty, fear, anger, or love, it functioned in place of the inhibitor that nature had failed to provide. My scientific mind reeled at the evolutionary ramifications. The rest of me, though, felt a sense of awe, because it was an elegant solution, in a grim sort of way, to the problem of survival under dire threats. We tested that synergy once more before our final departure from Charayan 7. The Hreskin had retreated, but we detected a small cluster of them lurking at the edges of the system, presumably waiting to pick off any vessel that strayed too far from protective orbit. Commander Roll and Colonel Hale collaborated on a ruse. The Dauntless would pretend to limp away, trailing engine fumes as if severely damaged, while the Ascendant Light stayed behind. The Hreskin pounced, but the humans had rigged an improvised gravity well generator, something that forcibly decelerated the pirates out of their faster-than-light jump, leaving them vulnerable to a sudden pincer. Attack! The plan worked flawlessly. The Hreskin lost 2 smaller raiders and fled again, scattering into deep space. Watching the lethal coordination with which the humans pulled off the tactic solidified the impression that once they committed to a plan, they would carry it through to the bitter end. Afterwards, the Ascendant Lights engineers finally managed to repair our drive systems enough that we could depart the system and head for Union space. Commander Roll extended an invitation for Colonel Hale and a small contingent to accompany us, to formally present their case to the Union Council. Hale agreed on the condition that some of his people remain behind to guard the outpost on Charayan 7. Our parting from the planet was tinged with uncertainty. Many in the Union had never heard of Earth, nor did we know how the Council would react. But the events of the past days had convinced me that bridging this gap was crucial. As we prepared to jump to faster than light, I found SGT McBride near the airlock, adjusting the straps on her gear. She was staying behind on Charayan 7, at her insistence, because she felt her place was with her squad. I approached her, awkward but sincere in my thanks. "Sergeant," I said, "I still can't fully wrap my mind around what I've seen from you. We were terrified, and yet you risked your life to help us repel those raiders." She regarded me quietly. "In your initial contact, you treated us like potential lab specimens. Can't say I blame you, but it put us on high alert. The reason we helped you was because, once we actually saw who you were, we realized you weren't just another threat. People in danger. Doesn't matter if they look like us or not. If we can help, we do, especially if we know we can make a difference." I considered her words, trying to think of a response that captured how profoundly my viewpoint had changed. "There's one thing that keeps echoing in my mind," I said at last. "You humans, you just keep going. No matter the injuries, no matter the sedation. It's beyond anything I've documented. She gave a faint smile. Our bodies don't always keep up with our will. Sometimes we die standing. Sometimes we live, but break inside. We're not invincible. Far from it. We just push. That's all. With that, she slung her weapon over her shoulder and walked down the ramp, back toward the planet that was now half liberated from the Hreskin threat. She never looked back, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface of what her kind was truly capable of. Our journey to Union space took several weeks. During that time, Colonel Hale, Lieutenant Kim, and a handful of other Earth officers remained with us in our quarters, participating in a cultural exchange of sorts. They showed us archived footage from Earth's 20th and 21st centuries. Horrifying wars, yes, but also tremendous technological leaps. Lieutenant Kim explained how adversity on Earth had driven humans to adapt at a breakneck pace. We always found new ways to fight, she said with a grim note, but also new ways to heal, to connect, to unify. We'd invent better medicine after we saw too many wounded. We'd draft international laws after we saw entire cities wiped out. It's not a pretty way to learn, but it's how we survived. Officer Darius was fascinated by their languages. Earth apparently had thousands, and humans had hammered out a global standard only in recent centuries. He discovered that their speech included idioms about perseverance, about never giving up, about pushing beyond what any rational mind would consider doable. It's encoded into your culture, he told them. Survival through sheer will. Coronel Nuded. Exactly. We had to be that way, or so many of us believed. When we finally arrived at the Union core sectors, the Ascendant Light and the humans aboard became the subject of immediate scrutiny. Starships of various member species converged in the region, curious and perhaps anxious about these off-switch, less humans. The Council convened an emergency session, and Commander Roll, Colonel Hale, and the rest of us found ourselves testifying before an assembly of hundreds of species. The cavernous hall was a swirl of color, motion, and layered voices through universal translators. Some delegates eyed the humans with outright dread, especially after hearing how they continued fighting under sedation. Others were curious or even excited by the prospect of a species that overcame natural limitations through culture and willpower. Colonel Hale gave a speech that was surprisingly eloquent. He explained that Earth was not a planet of bloodthirsty monsters, but a place where environmental hardships and frequent historical conflicts had forced them to evolve cunning, resilience, and a moral code to govern it all. We've done terrible things to each other, he admitted, and that taught us how precious it is to have rules, to have empathy. Without them, we'd tear ourselves apart. He paused, scanning the crowd of alien faces. We discovered the galaxy is larger and more diverse than we ever imagined. We're ready to engage with that galaxy. And yes, we can be dangerous, but so can many other species. The difference is that we have to choose to limit ourselves. A hush followed his speech. Some council members remained visibly skeptical. But as the details of how humans helped repel the Hreskin circulated, the climate shifted toward guarded acceptance. In the next days, I found myself assisting Commander Roll with the final reports. The Union leadership wanted thorough documentation of humanity's biology and culture. I wrote pages upon pages about the missing neural inhibitor pathway, about the remarkable adrenaline surges, about how sedation that would drop a Rhinorian war beast barely slowed these Earth soldiers. Yet the final pages addressed not just the biology, but the psychology and ethics that replaced that missing off switch. I quoted Colonel Hale's line about how a moral framework is what keeps them from destroying themselves. It felt momentous, as if I were a witness to a turning point in Union history. The moment we truly recognized that not all advanced species must follow the same path of evolution. The Council, for its part, declared a preliminary acceptance of Earth as a recognized sovereign power. They scheduled a series of negotiations for trade, cooperation, and mutual defense. Of course, distrust lingered among some delegates. Whispers about the human menace persisted. But even these critics admitted that humans could be strong allies in a universe that still contained unknown perils, not to mention the Hreskins' continuing threat. I recall one esteemed counselor from the planet Vresser, whose entire species was deeply pacifist, remarking, "Perhaps we need them. They can fight where we cannot, so long as they choose to remain guided by principle, not aggression." For a brief, hectic period, the Union's media outlets fixated on humans. Every day, new commentators speculated on Earth's potential militarism, its apparently unstoppable soldiers, but also on its art, music, and cultural traditions that the new delegates had begun to share. Some segments predicted a shining alliance. Others fretted about the day humanity might turn its unstoppable ferocity on the Union itself. Through it all, Colonel Hale and Commander Roll navigated the swirl of politics with stoic composure, forging a foundation that might one day become a lasting partnership. As for me, I often found myself in the company of Lieutenant Kim and a few others, exchanging knowledge over meals. She showed me images of Earth's mountains, deserts, oceans, and sprawling cities. I displayed for her the diverse worlds of the Union, from the lush underwater habitats of Marivia to the crystalline spires of Tekker. One evening, she asked me, "What's the single biggest thing that stands out to you about us, now that we've spent this time together?" I thought for a moment and then answered honestly, "You fill me with hope and terror in equal measure. You're so driven, so capable, yet you rely on your own moral sense instead of a built-in biological limit. If that moral sense fails, there's no fallback. But if it holds," I paused, "then there's no telling what wonders you might achieve." She smiled, though her eyes were thoughtful. "I suppose that's our burden and our promise." Eventually, the time came for Colonel Hale and his people to return to Earth, or at least to their forward operating base near Charon 7. They had arranged a set of mutual patrols to keep the area safe from the Hreskin. Commander Roll, after many intense debates with the Council, was granted permission to accompany them as part of an official Union envoy, continuing the dialogue. Some of the Union were outraged. Why trust these unstoppable warriors so soon? But others recognized that forging strong connections early might prevent misunderstandings later. On the day of their departure, I stood at the docking platform of the massive Union station where the negotiations had taken place. Colonel Hale, flanked by Lieutenant Kim and a few soldiers, prepared to board a sleek new craft that combined Earth's rugged design with some Union modifications. I approached him, extending my hand in an imitation of the human handshake I had seen so often. He clasped it, giving a firm but respectful squeeze. "Dr. Narek," he said, "thank you for your candor. If you're ever near Earth's sector, you'd be welcome to visit." "Thank you," I said, feeling a swirl of emotions. "There is so much more to learn about your people, and so much we can share, too. Just be mindful. Many in the Union are wary of you, especially after hearing the battle reports. They fear that once humans start fighting, there's no stopping you." He nodded gravely. "I understand. I hope we can show them that while we might not have a built-in off switch for combat, we do have an off switch here." He tapped the side of his head, presumably indicating his mind, or maybe his conscience. "It's not perfect, but we've come a long way since we first started warring among ourselves. If the Union is willing, Earth stands ready to do its part for a safer galaxy." I watched him and his team ascend the ramp. The craft's engines hummed with a hybrid thruster system that I knew humans had developed in record time once they got their hands on some Union data. Within minutes, they vanished into the station's traffic lanes, and soon after they were gone, heading back toward the frontier that had begun this entire saga. I took a deep breath. In the months that followed, I wrote my final comprehensive report on humans, integrating not only my biological findings, but also the socio-cultural insights gleaned from Colonel Hale, Lieutenant Kim, SGT, McBride, and the rest. The concluding section read something like this. For the first time, the Galactic Union has encountered a species that evolved without the standard neural inhibitor pathways observed in all other known civilizations. This results in a capacity for continued combat, even under physical and mental stress that would incapacitate any other race. Rather than relying on a biological trigger to shut down, humans rely on conscious decision. This is both their greatest danger and their greatest virtue. When they choose to fight, there is little that can dissuade them short of absolute physical destruction. When they choose to show mercy, it stems from a moral framework, not a reflex. That is a remarkable and precarious achievement. I remain both fascinated and wary of them. I think often of SGT McBride, who limped into battle on a wounded leg, yet never hesitated to hold the line for those she considered allies or innocents. I recall Colonel Hale's calm as he drew up complex tactics on the fly while facing a superior force. I remember the medics who patched up our people, ignoring their own bleeding arms. This is humanity. No off switch, no easy way out, no automatic failsafe. Just determination, fierce loyalty, and the fragile but potent choice to use that power for something other than conquest. I do not doubt that, in time, the Union and Earth will face new crises. The Hreskin remain a menace, and rumors swirl of other pirates or expansions from the unknown corners of the galaxy. Yet now we have these improbable allies standing beside us, a people who overcame their own savage impulses by forging laws and compassion. It is, in many ways, a testament to their adaptability. And if we ever find ourselves confronting a cosmic threat beyond anything we've known, I suspect we'll be profoundly glad to have the humans with us. Their unstoppable nature will be needed. Even if we might never fully comprehend how they can endure so much pain, we can at least respect the resilience and spirit behind it. Sometimes I think back to that first day on Charayan 7, peering around a dusty boulder at a group of armed bipeds in camouflage, and I realized that I, too, had an off switch of sorts, an assumption about how the universe worked. My mind wanted to believe that all rational beings had the same built-in safety limit. I wanted to believe that biology always prevented suicidally intense combat. The humans broke that assumption, forcing me to question the breadth of nature's possibilities. That perhaps was the hidden gift they gave us, a reminder that life is endlessly inventive, that evolution can produce solutions that defy our narrow definitions. And it is up to intelligence and compassion to shape those solutions responsibly. I wrap up this chronicle with a final reflection on the phrase that has become infamous throughout the Union in reference to humans. They don't have a goddamn off switch. The statement is blunt, almost crude, but it captures the raw, bewildering reality of who they are. Yet let us never forget the addendum to that observation. They also built their own moral switch, their own ethical guidelines that define when to stop or when to keep going against all odds. That deliberate choice is what sets them apart from merely savage beasts. That choice is what grants them the possibility of greatness alongside the capacity for destruction. I submit this record to the Union's archives with the hope that future generations of alien scholars, explorers, and leaders will understand the significance of humankind's path. May we forever keep in mind both the peril and the promise they represent. And may we, in our dealings with them, reflect the same resolve, to keep going when all seems lost, yet to temper our instincts with conscience, remembering that with great power comes the need for even greater wisdom. End of report. Dr. Syl Narek, Xenobiologist, Galactic Union Research Division. Sometimes the universe doesn't give you an off switch. Sometimes you have to build your own.